Good morning. Aloha, and thank you all for coming. Sorry for those of you who came in late. You have to sit in front. I know it's a fate worse than death, but most of you are faculty. You know the drill. I'm delighted that you're all able to join me this morning. I think many of you will have seen parts of this or heard parts of this, but I'm not sure I have ever presented it in this fashion in one presentation and with some slides to lead the way through. So we are being live webcast, and the video and the slides will be available online soon afterward, I guess. Right, Royd? Yes. I'm David Lassner. I'm your Interim Chancellor and President, and a longtime denizen of the university and UH Mānoa. So what I wanted to do is start out with a vision, and I've seen this described as my vision. I'll explain where some of the documents floating around came from. This particular language was crafted last summer. And for those of you who are familiar with the structure of the university, the officers of the University of Hawaii, who are designated in board strategy, board policy as the senior executives, are the chancellors of the four-year campuses. That's UH Mānoa, UH Hilo, UH West Oahu, the system vice presidents, including the vice president for community colleges, the board secretary, and the president. And we've had several times over the past few years where we've gotten together in retreat formats. And when we got together the last time to think about planning, we thought, let's start with our vision for Hawaii, and then let's use that to lead into our vision for the entire University of Hawaii system and what we think we have to accomplish to play our role in the Hawaii we want to see. So I won't read it to you. You're all good readers, I know. It's available in the document that has been sent out at least twice, actually at least 3 times now that I've seen. But this comes out of the Integrated Academic and Facilities Plan draft that has been in circulation. Within that document, and again, this is that draft integrated academic and facilities plan for the UH system. One of the goals of that document is to lay out, once again, the differentiated roles of the different parts of the UH system. So the language you see here, and I have gotten some comments, this is a draft that's under active review now, some comments and suggestions, but this lays out the role of UH Mānoa as the research university within the University of Hawaii system. So yes, there is another baccalaureate campus on this island and one in Hilo, but they are not aspiring to be, nor will they be supported in becoming research universities. And this is the key to mission differentiation, is to understand the roles of the 10 campuses within the UH system so that we can effectively and efficiently move forward as a university system for the state of Hawaii. And what I will say is again, this has been vetted by the leaders of the other units, they are not trying to become research universities. So for me, when I agreed to step into this role, and I'll say even as I agreed to be considered as interim president and then president of the system, I feel like the governor. I really do believe, as he often says, that this is a time of opportunity for UH and UH Mānoa. I think our perception in the community is better than it was when I came into this role. We were at a relatively low point following a set of incidents and interactions with the legislature and the public, which were not positive. And I think, and I do give credit to Dan Meisenthal and his team, our portrayal in the media is much more positive today than it was 4 years ago. That doesn't mean that when something goes wrong on a campus, we get coverage, but it tends to be more fair, and when we do something well, it also gets coverage, and that was not happening in the past. I will say that I believe the leadership, and inclusive of faculty leadership, believes that we need to change, that the patterns that have been in place now, many of them for decades, that may have served us well in the past, don't necessarily serve us well today. We do have a very collaborative team of leaders that is willing to work together, both at UH Mānoa and across the UH system. And maybe a comment on the budget, which I know always attracts the most attention. We are at a very fragile moment, I will say. So our enrollment, and I'll show you a picture, but we do have 5 years of declining enrollment, declining faster each year than the year before over these past 5 years. This is the first year in probably 15 years that we have no tuition increase at all. So declining enrollment means declining revenue. And right now tuition is, ballpark half our operating budget for the campus as a whole, meaning funding our basic operations outside, auxiliaries and extramural research. At the same time, if you watch the papers, we do have declining forecasts of state revenue. So the good news is we are not looking at cuts from the state government. And those of you who have been around for a while, when we have been in recessionary periods, the university has received significant cuts. And we have not recovered from the cuts that were taken by the UH system and by UH Mānoa during recessionary periods, cuts to our general fund appropriations. That said, we are not looking at cuts, but we're also not looking at the possibility right now of the legislature bailing us out in some heroic manner. There simply isn't very much money, and the budget projections from the governor in December to the governor in January to the state Senate to the state House as you follow the state budget process, each of those is smaller than the one before, but again, still bigger than the current fiscal year. What I will say, and what I hope everybody can appreciate, is that we control our destiny. Our finances, the education we deliver, the research we do, these are things that are under our control. And for me, I am looking forward to working with people who want to seize control of our destiny and craft a path forward that's great for our students, great for our university, great for our state, and great for global knowledge and understanding. I know in at least one email that I saw floating around among a faculty group, this was billed as my plan for how I will change the university. And what I want all of you to understand is that I'm only part of this. And I'm going to just mention these 4 initiatives, all of which have taken place in the last 4 years, with different groups laying out some of the opportunities for improvement before us. This is that the charge from that draft integrated academic and facilities plan I mentioned. Again, I won't be reading all of these slides. Let me just say this was laid out by the Board of Regents. So for those of you who don't think of it this way, the Board of Regents are the representatives of the public responsible for the governance of public higher education in our state. So their job is not to represent individual students, faculty, staff, or administrators. It's to look at the university system from the perspective of the public and to try, in some sense, to represent the views of the business community, the legislature, the public who want to send their students, as well as those of us inside the university, and certainly they hear from us more than others. And from their perspective, looking at the opportunities that we have as an integrated public higher education system, they're very interested in seeing us be very thoughtful about where we do what with intention, rather than just having every program or building pop up on any campus where somebody has the idea, or to have it driven politically. And there are many examples of where programs have begun on our campuses that were not necessarily generated from within, but rather suggested from without. This is a set of bullets, and again, this is from just January 2016. This is from the work of the Joint Task Force that was composed of system vice presidents, Mānoa vice chancellors, the previous interim chancellor, and myself as, at this time, just president. Looking at, as we were looking at the structure of UH Mānoa and the system, we identified a set of challenges and opportunities that we thought the system should take on through the reorganization. And we also identified a set of challenges and opportunities for UH Mānoa. And this was publicly presented, vetted to the Board of Regents now a little over a year ago. Then last June, when the Board of Regents was considering the next 3-year tuition schedule. So we had a 5-year tuition schedule that runs the period through this current academic year. This is the schedule that kicks in for beginning in fall 2017 for the next 3 academic years. And frankly, there was concern in particular that UH Mānoa had not yet seized control of its finances. And I'll say a little bit about that moving forward. When the board approved a tuition schedule that called for UH Mānoa a 0% increase in the next academic year, and then increases of 2% in the following 2 academic years. That's for resident undergraduate tuition and some variance in different roles. The 2% they designated as fully committed to address our facilities challenges. So there's a recognition that the need for investment in UH Mānoa facilities goes beyond any resources that we currently have available today. And at the same time, the board laid out these 5 items as what they expected from UH Mānoa. And this is, these 5 items, I gave an interim report in January to the Board of Regents on progress, and they requested an update. At the time, last June, they said within a year. So that will probably take place at the June 2017 Board of Regents meeting. They didn't expect that all of these would necessarily be done within 1 year, but they did expect to see substantial progress. Last summer, I met with the UH Mānoa deans several times. And the deans, I would say, as a group, and you can check in with them, we have a number of them here, were concerned about progress on the campus. And they proposed setting up 4 task forces, and I've sort of loosely lumped them together. From their perspective, they were willing to take on leadership as a group to move us forward across some areas of budgeting, enrollment, the campus physical facilities, and prioritization and structure, that is organizational structure of the campus. So these were their ideas, and last summer, maybe August, the interim chancellor, Robert Blythe Roman, actually charged these groups to begin working together. And of course, all of this is grounded in the UH Mānoa strategic plan, and I won't review that today, except to say that nothing that came out of any of those charges for improvement and change are inconsistent with anything in the UH Mānoa strategic plan. In fact, one of our opportunities is to make the linkages here. And you can see even in this matrix, which is on the strategic plan page, the linkages between the UH Mānoa initiatives, the system strategic objectives, and some identification of who's responsible for each of those areas of progress. So as I came in as interim chancellor September 1, so just over 7 months ago, I tried to view this as crafting a path forward for the campus. That clearly we have a strong strategic plan. We have 4 different calls to action. And so my thought was to come up with a plan for a path forward that in essence would address all of these, but without creating 5 sets of new task forces with 4 new challenges and so forth. And so that's what I will lay out for you today. Much of this work has been ongoing, some of it less visible than other. But in thinking about how to craft that forward, I think it is essential that we integrate with the UH Mānoa strategic plan. And I will just say this has to be mission focused. And when I think of a short, pithy statement of Manoa's mission, it is Hawaii's student-centered global research university. And each of those words means something to me. I thought we should build on past work. Much of this, much of the ideas have been worked on, some going back more than a decade, but we struggle to actually make a decision and move on when there is dissension. And if there is one plea I have for you, and I will end with this, it is that we not expect unanimity in change. Consensus is probably the best we can get if we're going to move forward at this time. That decisions need to be transparent and timely, and I will say the board has really influenced me on this, but thinking about our resources holistically, that we have processes for managing positions, we have processes for managing dollars, we have processes for managing space, but in reality, all of those are linked. Those are the resources, and of course, the people are our heart and soul and our brains as we move forward. Those need to be linked much better than they have. And at the end of it all, we have to be sustainable. And I mean that in every way. We have to be sustainable in the conventional sense of environmentally sustainable. Our buildings need to be more sustainable. But as an enterprise, we need to be financially sustainable. And I will say that 3 years ago, we were not. So this is the path forward that I'll speak about for the next probably 15 minutes or so, and then engage in comments and questions. I want to talk about these first 4 items in particular, because this is where work is underway. At the same time, while I won't be emphasizing this today, as we do so, we need to embrace the other parts of the UH Mānoa strategic plan, Kaho'oko Kuleana, Hawaiian Place of Learning, and the work on research strategic planning that Vice Chancellor for Research, Michael Bruno, was undertaking and is now continuing to support in his dual role. And let me start by saying one of the things as we began to engage in these was we realized that we needed data, and we didn't have all the data that we wanted. And in fact, this is something also that the Manoa Faculty Senate Executive Committee talked with me about pretty much every time I've met with them over the past 7 months. So let me just say a word about data to try to move us forward. The first thing I asked for was an update, and those of you who have been around since about 2009, under Chancellor Hinshaw, she initiated something called the Budget Prioritization Work Group. And many of us worked pretty hard on that. There were some outcomes. There were a lot more recommendations that were not acted on. But that group was driven by a pretty comprehensive data collection effort. That this was a group of about 20 people, faculty, students, administrators, community members, and the data was pulled together across each unit down to the department level, across students, personnel, finances, and different kinds of finances. And it gave a pretty good glimpse of our colleges and departments, but it was a one-time exercise. And so I asked, can we resurrect that data? Vice Chancellor Cutshaw did pull that together with her team. We used it for a series of mini retreats just last month with the deans and the Senate Executive Committee to look at some ideas for addressing budget challenges. And I have the URL up. If you track it down off of Kathy's webpage, you can see that data. as well as a set of data that had been produced through fiscal 2014 and has now been updated for 2015 and 16 with incredible detail about each of our units. Our data comes from multiple information systems. If you see things in those data sets that you do not think are accurate, then I encourage you to contact Kathy. We are trying to identify data errors if we find them. At this point, that data is mostly pulled out of our information systems, and we have a saying as an old computer guy, garbage in, garbage out. So we're willing to try to track those down. I think all of us believe that it is imperative that we have data that we can trust. One of the things that I noticed coming in as interim chancellor is that if I asked the vice chancellor for administration, finance, and operations for data, she got it through one methodology. If I asked the vice chancellor for academic affairs for data, there were different people getting it with different methodologies. If I asked the vice chancellor for research for data, might come in different people, different methodologies. And so for the first time we established within just the Manoa Chancellor's Office and Vice Chancellor's Office a data working group to look at how each of us are pulling our data. Some of this has to do with crosswalks around fuzzy principles like programs. What do we mean by program? Is it a degree, or biology used to be a program and is now a department and degree. Those crosswalks are sometimes done differently. So we're trying to identify those and then, again, update our core operational systems where necessary. So let me shift into enrollment management and start with probably the most depressing thing that I saw when I came into this job. When I looked at the last 5 years of enrollment, not only was it decreasing each year, but it was decreasing at an accelerating pace. So this troubles me for two reasons. First, this is our core job. I mean, we're here to educate students from Hawaii and the world, and we are educating fewer of them each year than the year before. Secondly, from a pragmatic budgetary perspective, as I mentioned, just about half our revenue comes from tuition, and fewer students, depending on the mix of resident, non-resident, and where they are and who's getting waivers. But in general, as enrollment goes down, our revenue goes down faster. What I will say is that these headcount decreases are not evenly distributed. And I'm not going to drill into that today in this setting, but I encourage any of you to look at the data and you can see exactly which programs are growing in terms of graduates, declared majors, student semester hours delivered. Those are the data that tell us what's actually going on inside a department at the quantitative level. That doesn't speak to quality and it doesn't speak to inspiration, but it does speak to quantity, which is part of what we have to pay attention to. So I issued a challenge, actually a two-part challenge. One was, can we stop the decline this fall? That is, return with fall 2017 to reverse 5 years of decline and have an enrollment, headcount enrollment, at least as high as fall 2016. Doesn't seem like it should be that hard, and I think it'll set a marker that we're able to set a target and achieve it that has both educational implications and financial implications. Longer term, we have hovered in the 20,000 range at many times in our past. Most recently during the recessionary period, 2009, 2010 we were there. So what do we have to do to get back there and then grow beyond? Right now, we don't actually know what our capacity is of this campus. Our physical capacity and our human resource capacity. Obviously, if we're growing to numbers, let's just say in the low 20,000s, we absolutely would need to add people, but we don't know where we need to add them because that's going to depend on where the students are who are coming back to rejoin us in a future that's more impactful for the state. So we did this through an enrollment management action team. I will say this was a second leap of understanding for me, was how disparate our efforts are on this campus in terms of who has responsibility for keeping students. I will say the first, or for growing our student enrollment. Some of the first meetings I attended, the conversation was all about recruitment. We need to recruit more students. Then as I talked with the recruitment people, they could look at it and say, we actually are recruiting more students. Our problem is retention. And in fact, we lose right now last year it was about 24% of our freshmen were not here for the sophomore year. That's a pretty large number. So again, those are disparate. They tend to be our mainland students. We lose them at a higher rate than our resident students. But oh, by the way, those are our students who tend to be paying higher tuition. So that impacts our bottom line even more deeply. And frankly, those are some of the students who help us establish our global reputation. So we established an enrollment management team. I want to thank Cliff Tanabe, who stepped up and is leading this with people across multiple vice chancellor and associate vice chancellor offices. We have deans helping with some of this. And within the strategic plan, we had a Spark and a Surge group, and we're pulling those together in one enrollment management action team. So we're looking at things that we are doing literally now. We started this from my perspective. January and February was not too late to impact our fall enrollment. So April 1 was the national date for us to notify students. May 1 is the national date for receiving deposits. We still have to deal with summer melt after then, but we did have some time to get people to accept our offers and to try to keep those who accept our offers enrolled moving forward. So we have several initiatives that are underway right now. You'll hear radio ads trying to get the students we accepted to enroll at UH, to choose us, to choose Mānoa over wherever else they may have been accepted. We're working together on financial aid. What I learned is that financial aid is given out from actually 2 different vice chancellor offices, multiple AVC offices under those vice chancellors, and then almost all of our UH Foundation scholarships are then administered by individual departments and programs. None of this is done with a coordinated strategy for how do we get students that we accept to attend, and how do we keep students who come here to stay here. And finances is one of the most important factors that we have to get students to attend and to keep them here once they accept us. We have a couple of great technology initiatives underway, and I think it was apparent to everybody, while nobody agrees on exactly what we have to do, this is pretty common, I think there is recognition that our organizational structure is not conducive to excellence in enrollment management. So the group is looking at all of those things at once, again, with a very short-term focus on our fall 2017 enrollment, both new students and retention of existing students. Us Mac guys don't do left mouse, right mouse very well, sorry. So here's a bit of good news I just wanted to put forward when I asked, Roxy is here in the back, who's responsible for recruitment. These are some amazing numbers when you look at fall 16, that's our current freshman class, and who we were able to recruit relative to fall 2015. And at the same time, our total enrollment went down faster than it had, at a higher percentage than it had for the last 5 years. So we need to keep doing this, but we've also got to keep the students that we do bring in. And I'll just note that these are people that are within our mission to serve as Hawaii's global, world-class, student-centered research university. And in particular, you know, what is unsaid in the good news is mainland students, again, who pay higher tuition, and frankly, our performance with transfer students is not very good. So we're able to identify from national data sets, for example, where do UH Community College students transfer to other than UH Mānoa if we are getting a declining share? And the suspicion is always that it's UH West Oahu, and I will tell you it is not. They are selecting private schools and mainland schools for opportunities that they are not finding on this campus today. And that, once again, that's under our control. So I won't go through all of these in detail, but you can see some of the work that is and has been underway. Some of it involves modern technologies that other universities have embraced probably 5 to 10 years faster than we have. Just as an example of reaching out, and I'd love all of you who are here to help us, we're looking at a week of welcome when students come in fall 17, when they show up. Let's help make the students who have come here from somewhere else, it's their first time in Hawaii probably, maybe with their parents, maybe not, how do we make them feel welcome? And that's something that if they don't connect with us during their first year, we know that's one of the reasons they leave us and don't come back here for a second year. We're doing some interesting work with financial aid, including looking at our non-resident. Just one example, our non-resident tuition has gone pretty high. So one of the ideas is rather than actually lower the rates, award more of that tuition that we're bringing in back as scholarships. And Andy Sutton and others have told us that international students actually feel like they're getting a bargain if they pay a high-priced tuition, but they get a portion of it back as scholarships. So those are the kinds of strategies that we're working with. We also ran a very cool regression analysis on the freshmen most likely to not return based on a set of objective metrics, and we've offered them specific scholarships to try and entice them to come back for a second year. So new retention scholarships, essentially. Finally, let me mention our facilities. You know, this is a challenge, and in many ways, I feel like it is the biggest challenge that is least under our control because the amount of money we need to really modernize UH Mānoa to be what it should be. I mean, that's a very big number, and I haven't yet figured out how to crack that one. But you know, everything we do is an improvement, and we had a team of architecture students looking at some lightweight ideas just to make the campus look better for fall 17. Investments in the range of $500,000 that may make people feel better about the time they spend walking across our campus. And you know, I wasn't going to say this, but you could call it lipstick on a pig, but it's a lipstick project. We know we have to be more systematic, so we brought in a national leader to give us some ideas about how to deploy analytics in enrollment management. And as I mentioned, there's probably some organizational shift of responsibility that needs to take place for us to be more strategic. Let me shift now to budget. I think many of you know there has been work for over 2.5 years on a new budget model, tuition allocation model. I came into this job pretty determined to actually do something. The model that was proposed came out of a campus-wide budget committee that included students, representatives from the then Faculty Senate, group of deans and administrators. They got pretty far, but it never got implemented. And as with many things, the farther along you get, the more people come up with other ideas that they believe are better, and momentum is easily lost. I learned in my work in information systems that you can't always get everything you want to get done the first time you move. So think of this as phase one. But the idea is to take a portion of our tuition and return it to units based on, and again, this was the work of the committee, this is not my work, SSH, that's a measure of how many students are being taught, number of majors, and number of graduates. So that's a mix of activity and outcomes, and that was the approach recommended, sort of a hybrid model. And again, this is why getting the data right was so important. And so we're stress testing those models now using actual data that we didn't have until this spring. I will say that This is a very challenging thing to do when enrollment is shrinking and resources are shrinking. The recommendation out of the budget committee was to do this in a fashion that does no harm. In essence, that not use this tuition allocation model to move money from one place to another, but rather to position ourselves for growth. And as I pointed out earlier, this interplays with everything else we have. It doesn't do any good to add massive amounts of dollars if you don't also have positions to fill. Similarly, you can't really take dollars away when 80% of our budget is in people if you aren't also moving positions around as well. So it's a lot more complicated than appears at first glance. This thing has been critiqued as the spaghetti model, so I'm happy to unveil for the first time today a picture that does not look like spaghetti. So this portrays that model in another way. You can look at it, but it shows how general funds and tuition flow in two directions, to campus mission and to individual operating units. And just for fun, here it is once again with the rainbow leaving its blessings of rain on all of us in lovely Manoa Valley. This model does not solve the budget problem. That's what I will tell you. It is a tool, it is part of it, and for those of you who remember Tom Bopp, this is something Tom Bopp started working on in the 90s and never quite got done. We are pretty determined to actually implement this model for fall 17, the allocations in the next academic year. But I just want to point out that really addressing our budget challenges is more about growing our revenue and managing our costs, not shuffling money from one unit to another and pitting ourselves against each other, which unfortunately it happens all too often. So I mentioned enrollment, including growing new degree programs. When social sciences, Denise Konen surveyed incoming freshmen and asked them what do they want to study, the number one selection was sustainability. We don't have a sustainability degree. So picture if we have global environmental science, you can put something together in interdisciplinary studies, but we aren't out pushing that which our students in social sciences at least had as a number one priority. That's a small thing. We have incredible, amazing people in sustainability across this entire university. But if a student says, I want to study sustainability, and they go to the UH Mānoa webpage, we're pretty much MIA, and they will move on to another institution if that's their passion. Number two, by the way, was criminology, which we also don't offer. The second area is research, and again, Vice Chancellor Bruno was working on a research strategic plan. This is a huge piece of what we do as a research university, and certainly our RTRF allocations are part of how we are able to grow that enterprise. I will say, without making it personal, that I think we underperform relative to peers in the amount of faculty time that is charged to extramural grants. And that goes both for our faculty and for iFaculty. And the questions and perspectives are different, but as a general strategy, probably people in the sciences who are teaching 1 and 2 courses because of scholarship also have an opportunity to put some of their time on extramural grants, just as do our faculty. Our workload policies, we have made a lot of progress in cataloging them and communicating them, but we still have some work to do to look down to the departmental level. I think all of you who are faculty know that the collective bargaining agreement calls for 24 credits per year for faculty. And to the extent nobody at UH Mānoa actually teaches 24 credits, that's highly appropriate because, once again, we're a global world-class research university, but we need to understand what people are doing instead of teaching. And we need to be able to make that case to our board, to our public, and frankly, faculty should be willing to make it to each other within the department, within the college, and across the campus. And I think that's part of what can improve the dialogue that I find unhelpful on campus when people from some units point at people from other units who aren't perceived as pulling their weight in certain ways. We need to focus on the courses that students need to graduate and students want. Increasingly, and we will be providing that data increasingly from STAR because we do have degree pathways in place. But those have to be the first priority for departments rather than courses which often have low enrollments that individuals want to teach. We have a position control initiative underway that I mentioned that can go hand in hand with campus strategies. I'll say a little bit more about energy costs. I know for many of the deans, there is a perspective that we can do much more with philanthropy, and over the next year I do intend to spend a fair amount of time with the UH Foundation to look at how can we engage better with the community. The community has to want to believe in us, and some of that is about the perception that we create ourselves with donors and others in the community. I think there are opportunities for public-private partnerships. This is not a magic bullet, and we aren't going to rebuild every academic building with someone else's money. That just doesn't work. But there may be ways in which we can both create a more engaging campus environment and modernize facilities by using other people's money to move forward. Let me just close with this last one. I am not despondent about state funding. I think when we make our case well and when we don't cut ourselves to pieces in public, which we have a grave tendency to do, I think we can make a strong argument to the state to invest, but I think it's going to be strategic investments. It's not going to be the same old story of give us back the money we used to have 10 years ago. It's going to be, here's something that UH Mānoa can uniquely do for the people of Hawaii, and we need your help to do it. And that's a very different story than going in and arguing poverty and complaining about some other piece of the university, thinking that if only they didn't fund X, we would get that money for Y. Because the reality is, the way that game works is they don't fund X, and then Y goes to some other part of state government. We need to stand together on some of these things. Just a comment about position control. This is something that had been suggested for a number of years that we have now moved forward on. The idea is that when a position goes vacant, it doesn't automatically get filled in the department or college where the vacancy occurs. We have a campus-wide strategy. And this is how we can deal with differential decline and growth across our academic units. Let me say something about facilities, and I'll just comment on three things. One is understanding our space. And I asked the question one day, do we know if we have enough space on campus? And by the way, I've worked on this campus. This is my 40th year. And I know we have never had enough space for anything I've ever been a part of. And I know every one of you feels the same way. But I could never understand, if you look at the aggregate across the 200 plus buildings on this campus, does the usable floor space that we have, is that appropriate for a university, a research university of, now just over 18,000 students with the kind of portfolio that we offer? And we don't know the answer to that. So this first project, and probably many of you have been visited by representatives from MK Think, they're a firm that knows how to do space surveys in universities. So I honestly don't know the answer to this question. I don't know if we need more space or not as a whole, or we just aren't managing the space we have. So that's what we intend to find out, including by unit. A second issue is we do have long-range development plans. I've seen multiple plans by operating units. The College of Education has a plan. Student Housing has a plan. In fact, they each have plans for some of the same spaces without knowing each other. In fact, the same consultant was involved in both their plans and got paid to do this twice. We don't have a plan for the whole campus, though. Do we need more student housing? If so, where would it go? Do we have a hope of ever having a campus town environment? We're told that students don't have anywhere to go here, our residential students. What do they do at night that would keep them on campus? And that's part of campus life and retention of students, especially our residential students, who are largely people who don't live in Honolulu. And it's a trek to get down to Puck's Alley, and there's not all that much there. So is that something we can do something about? So we're looking at, again, with this outfit called WRNS, they know how to do this and have done it for other universities. Can we do something that's less tactical than an LRDP that really gives us a vision for Mānoa, probably a 10, 20-year plus vision for how we will rebuild when we think about Kuykendall Hall? What should it be rebuilt as here? We know this thing has to, things have to happen here. I'll leave it at that. What? Let me say something about energy improvements. Again, we have two sets of activities underway. One is this is a conventional power purchase agreement going in 3 phases. So IFA has some PV going in. Phase 2 is a big one. Part of the plan was to put photovoltaic over our parking structures. This is in principle a fabulous idea because we get power for our campus and we get covered parking. It turns out that when the engineers went in and looked at it, it isn't clear that structurally our parking structure is capable of holding up PV. So we're ascertaining that now. We don't want to construct something and then have the parking structure fall down. We have some challenges, it turns out, structural challenges anyway, once we went in and started looking. And then we're also looking at student housing and the opportunities there. As a bigger project, we're looking at performance contracting. This has worked very successfully at the community colleges. It's actually one of the reasons, the tools that they use to drive their deferred maintenance backlog down to about $30 million is that by having private companies come in and replace, for example, air conditioning systems and water chilled systems, chilled water systems, they funded that completely out of the energy savings. So they accomplished both energy savings and modernization that brings down that deferred maintenance backlog that we've talked about so many times. So this is pretty challenging. That work is underway, but we probably won't have a contract until next year on that one. Let me comment now on some organizational improvements, and I met with the Manoa Faculty Senate CAB last month and talked about this as well. And I'll chunk this out into 3 parts. One is work that we're doing at the Chancellor's office and Vice Chancellor's offices. Second is campus organizational structure for the academic units. And a third is just to mention that we are still on the last stages of the Manoa system reorganization that was described last January and has been in implementation and consultation since. I will say, in addition, there are small reorganizations that go on all the time within individual units, and those will continue to proceed at pace. So this is what we're thinking about in the Chancellor's office with the targets and the goals. And I will just emphasize the need to integrate education and research much more deeply. We think this must emanate from the Chancellor's office, but it must be pervasive across the entire campus. And you will see this come back several times. The greatness of a UH Mānoa education for undergraduates is the opportunity to be taught by great researchers. And we can do more to ensure that that great research is infused into our undergraduate educational experience. And I thank the Manoa Faculty Senate for endorsing strongly the plan that was put forward, the undergraduate research initiative from Michael Bruno as well. We also, and I mentioned this, need to focus on enrollment management and some other priorities here. So this work is going on through a series of lively discussions with the vice chancellors and associate vice chancellors. It is safe to say that as of today, there is no agreement. I put out a straw man org chart, which was quite provocative in encouraging discussion, and that will continue. This will, of course, go through all the standard reorganization and consultation processes, but it isn't even clear yet what we will be proposing. This is the one that tends to get the most attention, and I saw some of the email floating around over the past couple days. we have struggled mightily at making changes in our academic structure. We have made some, I applaud, Center for Aging, social work, public health coming together. PBRC was kind of an open wound for about 5 years, which moved into SOEST a couple years ago. There was a time 3 years ago, I would say, when I looked at this as an efficiency matter. And it is very hard for a dean, and we have several of them, who have 12 to 20 faculty, smaller than many of the departments in our larger colleges. And they have all the responsibilities of a full dean. It's hard to manage that when you don't have scale. And the administrative resources are very comparable whether you have 12 faculty or whether you have 150 faculty. You have a set of responsibilities. That is still true, but what I have come to believe, particularly over my past couple years looking at it, is that the opportunities, that's not how we need to drive this. And I think my colleagues through a couple of mini retreats on this topic, that really what we should be looking at is how do we achieve sets of academic synergies that serve our students and serve our scholarship. And you know, one of the ones that's under discussion and the email is flying, it's pretty basic, but fundamentally it's about integrating the study and teaching of language and culture. We actually did this when we put Hawaii Nui Akea together. We brought together Hawaiian language and Hawaiian studies, but we only did it with Hawaiian language and Hawaiian studies. We didn't do it with any of the other languages and cultures that we teach here that are spread across right now 2 or 3 disparate colleges. So I'll just use that as an example. Similarly, the integration of education and research has to be something that we're thinking about every day. That's what distinguishes us at UH Mānoa. I will say I have strong feelings that, as I mentioned, we cannot wait for unanimity. There will always be someone against every change anyone can propose. The ORUs are an interesting question. You know, most of you know we don't have ORUs. We have ORUs, and they're not common across the American Research University enterprise. And we're bringing in an external research advisory board that will give some ideas. I would like to start with a few examples and ask teams of faculty and deans to actually look at a few examples. I think part of our ability to change will come from when people actually see us begin to make some changes that are strategic and to see successes emerge from those changes a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years later. We will begin to understand that change is a constant. It's not something we put off as long as possible. And getting down to the wire here, this is how I think of it again. The challenges before society, health, the environment, the impact of technology on the workplace, those are all grand challenges of society. They are all multidisciplinary. None of them get solved by a single scholar in their office or scholars within a single discipline. These are things that whether we are teaching students about sustainability or we're competing for large research grants about automation, the future of the workforce, driverless cars, any of those concepts, they cross multiple disciplines. Many of them are global in scale. We want to be competitive for research, and we want to be effective and synergistic in our teaching. I am interested in a concept, in some cases, of new interdisciplinary institutes. These would not have tenured faculty or new faculty. These would be a venue to pull together faculty with common interests who would retain their tenure in their home departments to focus on some of these grand challenges, like sustainability, like data sciences, for example, and analytics scattered across, and we haven't yet lost our way, but we certainly aren't competitive with research universities and other places, both across businesses, sciences, social sciences, and other disciplines. And we need to be more agile about creating new degree programs, many of which will be interdisciplinary, that will attract and engage today's students, not us. So let me close with this, and I'll leave it up as I take questions. I'm optimistic. I mean, I know I deliver some depressing messages, and I do try to do it with a smile, because I see these as opportunities for change. That when we understand where we can improve, that's the first step. We need to be able to work together, and we need to embrace change together and honor each other as we move forward to be an even greater research university for Hawaii. So let me stop there, and I thank you, and have at me. Dr. Butler. I'll repeat the questions. Let's do it that way.
Thank you for the message. I have some questions about the enrollment management piece. And have you teased apart the impact of mainland students? Do you know if the mainland retention problem is because many of them only intended to come for a year or not? And then have you teased apart the effect of rising tuition and declining enrollment? And then thirdly, have you looked at the impact of oversubscribed units that are underfunded as perhaps contributing to lack of student satisfaction?
So on the question was about whether we know if students, mainland students, only intended to come for 1 year. The answer to that one is we are planning to conduct a lever study to ask that question. Second part was?
The relationship between rising tuition and...
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. So financial impacts are certainly significant. Students do tell us that. Our enrollment grew even as tuition was going up very aggressively. So the first part of this century, our tuition went up, it more than doubled, right, during the period of, and at the same time we experienced enrollment growth. These last 5 years, tuition has risen, but relatively modestly compared to, 15, 25% tuition increases that we were having. We have tried with the policy of requiring, and at UH Mānoa, 20% of tuition goes back out in financial aid, including a minimum of 10% as need-based aid. We don't know that for sure. We are not competitive with UNLV and Boise State, but we are competitive with research universities that are comparable to UH Mānoa. I will say that our tuition is it's in the range of half of every private school in this state except for Kamehameha. So I do not believe that we have priced ourselves out of the market for residents. Third part, capacity, sorry. I do not have a study on that matter, whether or not students are leaving because they are enrolled in programs that are oversubscribed and can't get their classes. I know a lot of people have worked very hard over the past couple of years on, actually for the past decade, on making sure we have the courses that students need. I would implore those of you who are department chairs and faculty to try to focus first on those classes while we try to grow the resources in the specific, and as you know, this has to be by department. This is not just the arts and sciences growing and everybody else shrinking. In fact, it's much more nuanced than that, department by department. Natural sciences, many of them are growing really rapidly. So.
I think this plan has a lot of potential to be a step in the right direction. Just a couple things. Has there been any consideration into including veterans within the target population? I think the current VA data shows that veterans have an 80% retention rate compared to about 72%. I know LCC and Maui College has done a lot of great work in recruiting veterans. I've talked to some HPU counselors, and they've expressed to me that oftentimes their students transfer to Mānoa.
So I'm very familiar. Thank you. So the question was about veterans as a target population, and We have looked at that system-wide. In fact, I convened a task force a couple of years ago. It went on hiatus, and just last month, I think, Interim Associate Vice President for Student Affairs, Dr. Hei Okimoto, who's in the back, is pulling together a system-wide group, and I know at UH Mānoa, we are now hiring or have hired a veterans service specialist, a full-time. I'm looking for help for anyone from students. Oh, you're the... So thank you. Okay. Welcome aboard.
No, I'm not the position that's hired. I'm the student fellow.
Okay, so we're hiring a full-time person.
I'm familiar with it.
Yeah. So I agree. I mean, I guess yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Thanks for highlighting it. Yeah.
And in regards to, I guess, campus community, I'm also a transfer student at KCC. I definitely think talking to other transfer students that come from community colleges, I understand it's a four-year institution, but definitely something that we miss is that campus connection with not only just the campus, but the faculty as well. And this disconnect, I would say. And I think that's definitely something we're going to look into. And also in regards to...
One moment. Hear that, faculty? The comment was that compared to at a community college, as a former community college student, he feels less connected to the faculty.
Well, it's also just the campus itself. I mean, it's really hard for us to integrate here. I can't really articulate right now what exactly it is, but it's just talking with my friends as well that campus here. It's just been kind of difficult.
Well, look, I mean, if you have suggestions, send them along.
Yes.
Yeah,
Of course.
I think that's right, and that's part of the welcome, week of welcome, is to try and get students connected early, including, and I know many of the departments and colleges are looking at those opportunities as well.
And then just the last thing, in regards to, I guess students leaving here, I think there may be something that you guys may want to look into. How do we help students from the mainland deal with the cost of living? I know there's currently ongoing students, campus housing, et cetera, but that's definitely something that maybe we can address, articulate in the plan.
Yeah, thank you. That was a comment about mainland students needing help with cost of living.
Yeah, hi. I guess I have a question that maybe relates to the last one. So it costs for an undergraduate taking a lower division course quite a lot more to take that course at Mānoa than for community college. And so the question one might ask someone either in his role as chancellor or in his role as president of what is the expectation of what you get for the added cost. And I would say that 15 years ago, my answer would have been you get an enthusiastic expert in the field teaching a relatively small class of students where you can have a strong interaction with the students. But nowadays, because of the financial issues in some departments, what you have instead is an adjunct teaching a class of 60 students or more where you don't have the connection between the students. And certainly the research factors that you spent a lot of time talking about in your presentation. So I'm wondering if you can address the question of whether there's anything that you think we can do as far as returning value to the students for paying the extra, or maybe eliminate the tuition differential between Mānoa and the community college.
So so eliminating the tuition differential would be a pretty substantial challenge. I mean, UH Mānoa is pretty, I'm going to be on tape, I'm going to say it anyway, tape, archaic term. UH Mānoa is pretty well supported by our state legislature as a research university. I mean, if you check with your colleagues at other research universities and just ask them about how much of your operating budget comes from the state, we do pretty well. I'm going to go in a different way with it, if you don't mind, David. I'm going to say this: more than half of our students who graduate now, when they walk across the stage, started at a community college. That is a huge opportunity for UH Mānoa, instead of thinking about why didn't they come here for the past 2 years, to say how can we get even more of them here for an upper division experience and bring them into graduate school. It is, and this is nationally, it is much more affordable for any student in any state in this country to start at a community college. In addition, many of the students, particularly who come out of our public schools, are not admissible to UH Mānoa. And a community college experience helps prepare them for engagement at a research university or even one of our other university campuses. So this is not, for me, something to fight. It is something to embrace and leverage as a strength across the entire campus. And that's why I asked for the report on where are the community college students going and why aren't they all coming here? And I would love to understand it, and that's why I welcome the comments that once we get them here, we also have to understand how to help them succeed. And I think our transfer retention rates, I'm trying to remember the last time I looked at them, but they are also not as strong as they could be, especially our internal transfer rates for students from our own community colleges who presumably have figured out how to cope with Hawaiʻi. Yeah. But you know, good points. Yeah, it's not an easy answer.
I'm the person who writes you an email every week about the need for more compassionate communication.
Dr. Schultz, good to meet you.
I'm happy to come to your office anytime. So I was wondering if the University of Hawaii Manoa, which seems to be behind in some areas, for example, we don't have a behavioral intervention team, which is a trained-up team of faculty and staff that figures out how to find students who are suffering from anxiety, depression, or other crises and steer them to help. If you look at the Arizona State page or other pages, they all have these wonderful programs that find students in distress and get them help. That's just my one suggestion for the day, is to perhaps we could do something like that.
Thank you.
I advise an undergraduate who's from the mainland, and she told me rather something shocking, that the recruitment things that she saw from Hawaii just stressed that the weather was nice here, but never said anything about excellent programs. She told me that she got the impression that this was a reject school because we would take anybody, basically. Now, this is a very good student, I should say, and I completely trust what she tells me. But it does seem that we're not selling ourselves, and is that because we don't have anything good to sell, or we're not stressing that? I think that's a mistake.
Okay, point taken. The person who needs to hear heard. Yeah, I mean, personally, I think we have a great, if we're going to use the word sell, product to sell. I mean, I think this is an amazing institution with, you know, we're doing great things. We have superb capacity across any number of significant areas. Not every department is going to be a magnet for mainland students, but certainly many are. And we absolutely need to stress that as well. I'm not shy about my pride in this place. And next.
Hello everybody, my name is Siobhan, I work at the Honors Program, and I work with a lot of first-year executives, and one thing I'd like to say is think about resourcing bottleneck and courses that affect a number of different pathways, such as resourcing chemistry, resourcing math, at the level of supplemental instruction, the level of tutoring, and because those impact many degree pathways, and I work with a lot of transfer students. Sometimes the experience they have can really make you feel alienated, not supported, and we could do a better job of taking some of those first and second year initiatives academically and creating the kind of welcome in different ways. And I'll send you all the things.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really good. I think from my limited observation, the focus has been on getting the courses offered, but not necessarily maximizing success. We do have the infamous list of killer courses, and that have high drop, failure, withdrawal rates, and are critical for multiple curricula. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Can I ask Pui? I just promised him he could go next before that.
With decline in enrollment from the physics department, I certainly don't sense it because 120 level physics course for the past several years, the enrollment has actually increased. I have to keep bigger tournaments and combine sections together to make bigger sections because we don't have enough factors to keep. So I certainly don't sense it. But the resource that we get is getting less and less. So let me go back to the idea of the budget is shrinking, but the promise is do no harm. As a physicist, I just cannot put those two ideas in a comparable.
So if I can say let's just, I'm trying to be careful to not pit anyone against anyone else. But if your enrollment is going up and someone else's, and the overall campus enrollment is going down 20% in the last 5 years, and our faculty has not shrunk 20%. So if those dollars are being expended primarily on faculty who are in other departments, I can't move all of those dollars with somebody who teaches something else, you can imagine what, and say, okay, the enrollment in department X went down, we're going to move them over to teach upper division physics because we don't have anyone to do that. So that's why I say the budget allocation mechanism is not a singular tool to move coherently the resources to where they need to be. So that has to be a much more thoughtful and strategic conversation that involves both positions and dollars, and that's why this is part of a strategy, but it is not the solution to the strategy. Yeah, so point taken, natural sciences, which is part of physics, is one of the growing, areas. Sorry.
Yes, I would just say really briefly in response to David and Jamal that the honors program going for honors college could help define UH Manoa's first 2 years into a 4-year program. Just bring that in there. I had a question about two little factors in your presentation that I connected together. One early on you said on the screen in the vision that we're research intensive. I was curious why intensive, not research extensive, because intensive implies targeting certain kinds of research areas and maybe getting rid of others. And later on there's a comment about how we need to be agile and re-gearing toward what students want and what the culture and the market demands. And that is clearly a factor, but shouldn't we as a university also be countercultural in speaking back to our communities about what is of value and challenging the values of a market-driven university set of majors. So I don't want to discount the fact that we have student demands for certain things, but many of the ones that are undeclared or declare a certain major get lost because they really can't do it or don't want to do it or hate it. So I'm just wondering if we can, as a university, help the culture redefine what is of value in higher education instead of just accepting the demands from the market that's coming to us.
So the first, I think research intensive arises from the Carnegie Commission. That is what R1, we used to be an R1, and there's no such thing as an R1 anymore. And I think they call it research intensive, yeah. So that wasn't intended, but I will say I'm not going to disavow what you read into that, which is we can't be all things to all people, and so focus is not a bad thing either. I absolutely agree that we need to be the voice of why higher education matters beyond preparing for a job. And that's part of our mission, and we will be the best messengers of that. But, I mean, I think you seem to say it. We have to do both. And it doesn't do us any good to explain that the most important thing anyone can study is the classics because it will prepare them for anything, if we can't effectively convey that message so that students are willing to study the classics. It's the most important thing we can study, right, Peter?